Well, friends, there's this moment that comes right after the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 5, Jesus is gathering together a lot of folks, and he begins to share these incredible, inspiring words about how to be blessed and all these different things. He starts to teach on different things that are in ways that the world and humanity had never been taught or have seen or have realized. And after the moment is over, after the thing has been concluded and everyone's making their way back home, there comes this moment that is a little bewildering, a little unexpected, because they start to make their way back down the mountain, heading to the nearest city. And off in the distance, running their direction, comes a guest that no one ever thought would come their way. And as the blurred image gets clearer and clearer and clearer, as the person gets a little bit closer and closer, I just begin to imagine that some of the disciples and the people who are walking with Jesus, and they're like, yeah, man, that was amazing. Oh, did you see how many people were there and how people were just so hungry for what you were sharing? Wasn't that amazing? I just imagine the chit-chat begins to stop as they see this figure and they hear the metal on his armor clinging as he's coming their way. Because as the blurred image gets clear, they see that it's a Roman guard. And I wonder if maybe Peter and a few others stepped in front of Jesus as if they're trying to protect him. Wondering what's going to happen next. Is he coming to give a warning? Is he coming to give a threat? Is he coming to actually do something? And as he gets even closer, they start to see the type of armor he has and the helmet and the parts of his garments. And they see that he's not just a regular guard, but he's actually a centurion. This gentleman is a person of great authority. That he has dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of soldiers at his command. Wow. I can only imagine everyone's heart going up into their throat as they're wondering what's about to happen. Wondering what he's going to say first. What the tone of his voice is going to be like. But to their complete surprise, he does something a little bit different. In Matthew chapter 8, we see this moment. It says, when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said. Lord. There are a lot of moments where people come to talk to Jesus, and usually they call him teacher or good teacher or prophet. They don't often call him Lord. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home, paralyzed, suffering terribly. Jesus said to him, shall I come and heal him? The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed. And listen, it says, and he said to those following, he didn't say this to the guard in front of him, but I imagine he began to turn around and talk to the disciples and others who are there. And he says this, truly I tell you, I have never found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then Jesus said to the centurion, go, let it be done just as you believed it would. And his servant was healed at that moment. Wow. I would love just a snapshot of what is happening in this moment. Not of the centurion running and coming to Jesus. Not in him trying to plead his case and ask for help. And I wouldn't necessarily need a snapshot of seeing what Jesus' response would look like in that moment, but what I would be so amazed at being to see would be the faces of those following. Because as Jesus says that this man who they thought was the enemy, they despised. This man who knew none of their Old Testament living, knew none of their way of life. This man who didn't grow up in any religion, didn't grow up familiar with the Old Testament and the history of what God was doing in the world. He didn't grow up in any of that. He likely wasn't from the area. He likely came from afar into this place to given a post to run and do his job. But yet in this moment, Jesus says, wow, look at this guy. He has more faith than anyone I've seen in Israel. And I just imagine reading between the lines of, and that includes all of you. Wow. And what is fascinating, church, is that Jesus looks at this man and he doesn't see the status of his badges and his armor. He doesn't feel worried or fearful of what may happen next. He isn't even honored in the way that some would find themselves to be spoken to from a superior and to be honored in that kind of regard. It's a different dynamic. And what happens is that Jesus sees through this moment into this man's heart, and he sees where he is, and it's made so apparent to us and apparent to him because of the way that he approached and came and brought his worry to Jesus with great faith, with great belief, and knowing that you can take care of this. I don't care what the other guards, the other generals, I don't care what they have to say about me. I don't care how others see me, because there was this kind of way of living where Roman officials and guards, they would want to keep themselves separate and on a higher level on this pedestal, and they would kind of put their foot and kick down anyone, from the culture who tried to get up to their level. And he's like, I don't care if it appears that I've stepped down from where I've been raised. I need you. And what is so fascinating is that as Jesus describes the faith of this man, it's not built on knowledge that he learned in kids' church growing up. It's not based on all the VeggieTale films that he's seen. Maybe they didn't have that back then. They probably didn't. It wasn't built on any of those things of how much they knew or memorized. It was this moment of trusting and calling out to and coming to. And what I want us to understand, church, as this man, he was unashamed. Unashamed. As he brought himself to Jesus. And I want to ask you this question, church. I want to ask you this question, and it's important that we lean into it a little bit because it can be quite revealing. How would God describe the way that you bring things to him? Would it be unashamed like this gentleman, or would there be more pride? Would God say, he doesn't really talk much, or wow, he's quite a talker, he just loves talking to me? Would God say to you, she loves to share what she wants, but she's not all that interested in hearing from me how I want to lead her? Would he say that he loves to talk about other people and raise their problems to him, but they're not all that interested to hear what I have to say about them? And why this is so important, church, and I lean into it together this morning, is because last week we kicked off this year in this focus of being starved for God and wanting, not just the casual or the mundane, but the real and the miraculous. Wanting really the God of heaven to step into our life and move in a way that we've never seen him move. And what's so important this morning is I want us to lean into this reality that it matters how we bring ourselves to God and we bring things to God. And as we've been talking through these conversations of faith practices, the things that we do, we talked last week about prayer and the heart of prayer. And this morning, I want us to lean into this conversation because there's something in our Christian faith that we often, in our modern expression of it, don't really do. Maybe we grew up seeing it. Maybe we're aware of it. But it doesn't have a natural, regular rhythm in our life of us practicing it. It's not something that God commands that we do, so perhaps that's why we kind of look on past it. But if we can be honest, maybe there are a few commands that we already look on past, perhaps. But this reality that Jesus invites us into this way of living where we have this regular routine of fasting in our spiritual journey. Of fasting. And what I want us to understand this morning, church, is that we fast as Christians to change the way we bring things to God. It changes the way we bring things to God. It changes the way we bring things to God. And what's so important, because we're now 5 days into our 21 days of prayer and fasting, and we'll lean into that a little bit more later on in our conversation. And so maybe already this week you've been fasting for a day or doing one of the 4 different examples that we gave of how we can practice this and embrace it. But it's easy for us to have alternative motives, and it's easy for us to miss the mark of why we embrace this spiritual practice. And what we fail to recognize is that if we have other motives or we have other focuses in perspective of why we're doing this, then it's very counterproductive in our journey of faith. You see, there's this moment in the Old Testament where God speaks to a guy named Isaiah. And he speaks to this guy who is often a spokesman for God to the people. And it comes to this moment where God wants to sort through some things. And he says this in Isaiah 58, verse 2. He says, "For day after day they seek me out." This is God talking to Isaiah. "For day after day they seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways." Talking about all the people. "As if they were a nation that does what it is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near to them. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high." And this is a moment, church, where God is bringing to them this honest truth of where they're at with Him. And as they've been doing this practice and they've been doing this thing where they abstain from eating, or they do these different things where they abstain from different things that allow again for them to hunger for God. And the Lord is saying, you're missing everything. Because it's not at all changed the way you bring yourself to me. It's not at all changed the way that you bring your requests, your worries, your fears, your concerns to me. It's not changed anything. And he actually goes to unpack and he explains in the next several verses. He says, listen, you would understand this because around you, you see great problems. You see how I'm not moving. You see that I look right through the artificialness of what you're trying to live. And you see the strife. You see the problems. You see the issues that you're experiencing. And you wonder why. And then God says, if you would just aim right. He says later in verse 11, he says this. There we go. He says in verse 11, the Lord will guide you always, and he will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land, and will strengthen your frame. I love this last part. And you will be like a well-watered garden, and like a spring whose waters never fail. Not about trying to lose weight. Not about trying to prove yourself to God. Not about trying to show how strong you are in this. And maybe this 21 days of prayer and fasting is the first time you've ever fasted. First time that we've talked about this, and it's new for you. And I love that it is, because this is wonderful. But understand that any motive outside of changing the way that we bring things to God is counterproductive. But if it's right, wow. And church, what I want us to begin to understand, what I want us to lean into, is this real reality that we often fast in the way how it changes that we bring things to God. And the purpose behind it is that fasting is meant to weaken you before God. So that way He is strong. He's the only one who's strong. He's the only one. You know, there's this wild moment in the Old Testament where Daniel, perhaps you know a little bit of his story. Part of it has a furnace. There comes this middle of his life after the first king has passed away, and the next king that he begins to kind of work with, this king of Persia, King Darius is his name, and he begins to create a great friendship and connection with this gentleman, and the king really seeks out wisdom and insight from him, and back and forth, and there are many who become very jealous, very, very jealous. And you see what happens is a lot of those who were jealous and envious of what was going on, they decided that they could kind of conspire this idea that they could try to convince the king to create this law where for the next couple of weeks it would be illegal for someone to pray. It'd be illegal. And they kind of propose it in such a way, and the king's like, okay, I guess so. And they're like, yeah, and if someone breaks it, then they can get, I don't know, tossed into a pit of lions. I don't know. And sure enough, the king approves, unknowing what they're up to. Daniel is caught. And as the king hears the news, sees Daniel thrown in prison. In the pit of lions. It's interesting because I encourage you to read the story this week in the middle part of Daniel. But what's fascinating is that as the Bible explains to us what's happening, it's not focused on Daniel, but it's focused on the king. And what is quite shocking is that we don't see some big audacious prayer from Daniel. We don't see him call out for help from God when he's being thrown in and he sees the lions. We don't see any promise from heaven given to him. We don't see any of that stuff. But what we do see is we see the king go back to his palace. And it says this in chapter 6. It says, then the king returned to his palace and he spent the night without eating. And the next morning as he goes, he calls out for Daniel. Daniel says, yeah, I'm okay. I'm doing great. Got some nice pets. And the king is wowed. And what is so amazing, church, so amazing, is that the king begins to make this decree. We don't see this moment of him professing faith in God, but he makes this decree to himself, to everyone, that the God of Daniel is the one right, true, living God. Wow. Understand, friends, that when we find ourselves in a season of life where it is hard, where it is heavy, and it is challenging, those are great seasons where we can embrace the spiritual practice of fasting because it shows our desperation for God. That, Lord, more than I want food, More than I want any of this, I want you. And I need you. More than I need any of this stuff. More than I want my belly to be full. Lord, I want to see you work in this. And often pride gets the best of us. Often we don't want to seem or come across as needy or helpless. We don't enjoy that. We don't like that image of ourselves. But understand, moment after moment after moment after moment, all throughout the Bible, we see these incredible moments where people in great seasons of desperation, seasons of concern, seasons of worry, they fasted and they prayed and they said, Lord, I want you to do this, please. Not always would he, but oftentimes he would. And I want us to embrace this reality, church. Understand that it matters the way we bring ourselves, not just vocally, but physically to God. And he sees the external of our life as we abstain from a necessity of living. He sees that as we call out to him for help. There's a story once I heard of a woman named Susan. In December of one year, she all of a sudden lost her job. Christmas was coming. They were behind on some things, and her and her husband, life just began to crumble and fall apart. And even just after the holidays, she lost her younger brother, who was about 35 years old. And just in a month or two of great hardship, the church that they belonged to began the year with a couple of weeks of prayer and fasting. And so you know what? She decided that she had reached rock bottom. She had reached the point of wondering if life was even meant going on. And so she took up the challenge and she began to fast and she began to pray. And out of nowhere, she got a phone call from the company that fired her and saying that we want to give you a severance package for letting you go, and it's an entire year's salary. Wow. Wow. And the Lord restored and brought healing and wholeness to her soul, great comfort and peace that she had never known, that helped her through the process of grieving. I heard another story of a young couple named Darren and Sarah, and for many years they had tried to get pregnant. They had spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on IVF and different things, trying, great seasons of hardship. And they were in a small group, and the group said, listen, we see what you're doing. We all together want to spend a couple of weeks just fasting and praying together. And they're like, we've never done this, but I guess we'll try it. Let's just see what happens. And later that year, the Lord blessed them with a little baby boy. There's another story of a woman named Lisa, a single mom whose teenage daughter began to get very, very ill. And she was devastated when she heard the word spoken from the doctor that she had leukemia. Just a child. So her and her church and her community, her friends around her, began to pray and fast. And then with just a couple of weeks, she was restored. And the cancer was gone. There's another story of a teenage boy named Tanner. He was greatly concerned for the condition of his family, and especially for his dad. His dad was falling into alcoholism, and he could just see the suffering and the heartache of his dad. So a few of his buddies got together. How about for the next couple of days, next few weeks even, let's pray and let's fast. And let's just see if God can do a miracle. And one day as Tanner was in his room doing homework, his dad came in and he said, listen, I heard this saying today, and I just feel like I've got to ask you about it. And it was a Bible verse. And Tanner got to talk to his dad about Jesus and led his father to God. And seeing him later get baptized, seeing his mom and his siblings too, and their whole family brought to God. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what's happening in your life. I don't know. And maybe you're in a season where things are great, and that is wonderful. Praise God. But I encourage you in these weeks that we're together, in these weeks where we're as individuals living our life, and as weeks as we gather, these days that we gather and worship, I urge you, take God up on this challenge of showing him how desperate you are for his help, and call out to him. And let him see how hungry you are for him to do something, because you're tired of trying on your own. You're tired of dealing with this brick wall, and you need it to be broken down. You need God to make a way where there has been no way for so long. Just the last few days as we began this, I've spent some of the time fasting and praying, and and I believe that God is already beginning to open a few opportunities for us as we've been praying together as a church about our future church building. The Lord hears us. He pays attention. And maybe you feel like he doesn't, but I tell you he does. And I encourage you, if you haven't yet grabbed one of the green cards that talk all about the different types of fasting, and I'll share with you right here, there's the idea of complete fasting where we abstain from eating all food and we just drink water. And I encourage, maybe if this is new for you, go a day or two at a time, then go off for a couple of days and then get back into it or whatnot, or cycle through. But the complete fast, there's the selective fast, especially for folks who have some medical conditions, and so that you abstain from certain food items, and it could be sweets or soda, or it could be certain types of biblical fast, like the Daniel fast, where you only eat vegetables. There's partial fast, where you skip certain meals of the day. There's a soul fast, where you abstain from certain personal pleasures, like social media or TV. But the purpose is not to show God how strong we are and how long we can do this. It is quite the opposite. To show him that we can't. To show him that we're tired. Show him that our hearts grieve for our children, our grandchildren. Our heart grieve for the wandering in our community. Our hearts grieve for the coworker of ours that sits at the desk just next to us. That our hearts grieve for even our own marriage if there's disconnection and broken trust. There's broken relationship, whatever it may be. Take God up on his offer. Read the stories of Scripture where over and over and over again people fasted and they prayed. I said, God, I can't do this without you. I need you to lead me. I need you to make it clear. I don't know where to go next, but I'm going to walk in faith. Lord, I feel like I've already tried to help and the help's not being received, so Lord, I need you to do it. Lord, this is getting too heavy for me to hold on to. I need you to carry it. Lord, I've had this illness for a long time, and it has kept me from being with my grandchildren. It's kept me from being used by you. And so, Lord, I'm going to be desperate before you. And I'm going to pray, and I'm going to pray. And you know what, church? I just shared a bunch of stories of people in other churches, and I can't wait till we have stories of our own. Stories of the God of miracles working. I can't wait as in a couple of weeks we start our small groups, and I can't wait just to see how God's hand has been on us, his blessing, him moving and working. I can't wait, church. So I encourage you Tomorrow is the start of a new week. I encourage you to embrace this challenge. Take God up on one of these 4 different types of practices and say, Lord, I'm doing this not to lose weight. I'm doing this not to prove my strength to you. I'm doing this so that I can be weakened before you. And then I become so weak that now you are the only one who holds me up. And that just as the Apostle Paul says, that Lord, I become so weak, but now finally I get to see the strength of Christ. Lord, that's what I want. Lord, these kids are driving me insane. My spouse. Whew. But you would fill me in a way that I've never let you fill me before, and that I have never known. The strength and the hope that I have, the peace inside of me, I've seen it in others, and now I have it for myself. What if February 1st comes along, you've taken God up on this challenge, and you've gotten to see the God of miracles work? What if financial struggles, whatever it may be, what if God did it? Would you pray with me, church?